Okay, let's move on to the first paper, which is supposed to be presented by myself. This work has been done with one of my ex-students, Dr. Bu, and he already got a new job in Korea. So anyway, I have to present this work instead of him. So in this work, we just wanted to detect the phishing URL. Nowadays, quite big problem in society, especially in Korea. So in order to solve this problem, our team has been working on applying or devising many interesting techniques. And today, I will give one of them called Disentangled Prototypical Neural Network, which is quite popular nowadays in computer vision. So the whole presentation is given like this. So after introducing the definition of phishing URL detection, I will present the proposed method, disentangled prototypical network, followed by some evaluation result with 3 benchmark data sets. So these are the URLs, right? So most of the URLs look quite similar. However, this is real URL, and this is fake, and real. So our problem is to detect whether the current URL is benign or phishing. So there are many approaches, and especially nowadays, deep learning is just so popular. So many people just try to solve this problem with deep learning. And the main idea is to classify the URL address as benign or phishing. It is the typical 2-class classification problem. However, it's not that simple, because that phishing URL is every day newly created immediately after use. You know, the hacker and bad guys are smart enough to change their strategies. So it is quite difficult to acquire the diverse and labeled data set to train that deep learning or neural networks. So current models may not generalize well to new phishing attacks. That is called the zero-day phishing or something. So we need another method that can learn the robust and discriminative representations from limited samples, because we cannot get all the samples for phishing URLs. So luckily, there are quite many people working in the same problem. Most of the problems can be categorized into URL classification or zero-day phishing URL classification. So some people are more interested in the detection of new phishing URLs. So for the first category, the most important method is devised by Microsoft called Texception. It is based on the convolution neural network with 2 channels of the input: character level embedding and word level embedding. That is quite popular technique to solve some problems in natural language processing. Anyway, the performance-wise, it is the best anyway. And it was published in 2020, 3 years ago. And also for zero-day phishing URL classification, mostly convolutional autoencoder performs the best. So I will briefly show the 2 approaches a little. So the first approach called Texception network, which consists of multiple convolution layers. It is just the convolutional neural networks. However, use the 2 different channels for character level embedding and word level embedding with different sizes of filters. And the basic idea is to use 2 parallel paths to extract the character level information as well as the word level information at the same time. So after these 2 paths, the final embeddings are concatenated into one vector. And finally, the fully connected layers can produce the classification result. And second notable approach is called anomaly detection. And in this approach also, they use 2 different representations: character level representation and word level representation. So as the name says, the character level means that the input is divided by in character H, T, T, P. However, the word level representation produces the HTTP, www, Google, etc. And the general structure looks like this. So basically, the architecture is autoencoder, the encoder, and decoder. And by training this autoencoder, the normal URL can be easily reconstructed. However, abnormal URLs cannot be easily reconstructed. That kind of difference is the key point to detect whether the current URL is benign or phishing. So mostly they try to train the model with large number of normal URLs. In this case, they trained the model autoencoder with 1 million URLs. And as I mentioned before, the reconstruction error is the measure to detect whether the current URL is phishing or not. So anyway, we try to devise that better method to outperform the previous well-known method, which is based on the prototypical network. And the prototypical network is quite popular, as I mentioned before. The main goal is to detect the phishing URL with quite limited number of samples. That is called the few-shot learning in the field of computer vision. So in order to achieve this goal, we'd better to induce large separation between benign and phishing URL samples for enhanced classification with limited samples. Here, that disentanglement is another name of inducing the large separation. And prototypes, we do not store all the samples. So we'd better to figure out the representative samples. That is called the prototype. So this slide, this figure shows that overall architecture. So here, from the URL data set, we get the sequence of characters like this. And we have to apply the character indexing to produce the character level representation. This representation is the representation of one URL. So out of those whole training samples, we'd better to train the prototypes, which is most representative for benign and phishing. So in order to that, we apply the triplet learning. So it is also quite popular in computer vision. So basically, based on anchor, positive, and negative samples. And with some appropriate loss function, that is called the triplet loss, we can construct some different representations, which is a little bit farther for the different classes and similar, closer to the same classes. And in addition to that, we apply the prototypical loss because we wanted to obtain the prototypes as typical samples. So anyway, we have two different loss terms. That is the main idea of our approach. So in the paper, there are many equations and something, so we have to define the terminologies and symbols. And basically, as I mentioned before, we have to devise two different terms. The triplet sampling to maximize the interclass distance and prototyping to minimize the intra-class distance. By utilizing those two measures appropriately, we can get a better loss function like L total is the linear combination of L prototyping and L triplet. Okay? In some sense, this is sort of the typical hybrid approach to utilize two different methods to solve this problem exactly. So this slide shows that you are prototyping for few-shot learning. Few-shot learning means that we only use that few samples or few iterations to construct the model. So URL prototype, so-called representative URL samples, can be obtained with class embedding function like this. And also prototype matching is needed because we have to figure out the distance between the prototypes. So the matching score is calculated with class probability like this. And in order to learn disentangled and informative URL feature space for detection, we utilize the triplet loss, as I mentioned before. There are 3 different components in triplet loss. Anchor, it is just the baseline, and positive is the same class data, and negative is different class data. And finally, we want to optimize the feature vectors by comparing an anchor URL with positive URL and negative URL with these equations. So as a result, we can get discriminative learning, which helps the model pull similar URLs close and push dissimilar ones further apart in the feature space. That is our goal. Yep. So finally, the complementary to prototypical network, we utilize the triplet loss, which refines the feature space, and finally making the URL prototypes more representative than the conventional prototypical neural network. So this slide just shows the effect of the disentangled prototyping. So originally, URL prototyping just samples the representative URLs in a feature space guided by the prototypical loss. However, in addition to that, we just wanted to disentangle the prototyping, set up from prototyping and disentangling feature vectors to better represent URL features. So unlike the usual representation, by utilizing the disentangled URL prototyping, the more distinctive samples can be figured out. And using those limited number of representatives as prototypes, future learning can be possible. That's all. So we just wanted to evaluate our method with some well-known benchmark data set. So first, we collect quite many data, 1.2 million URLs from Fish Tank. It is quite popular repository of the data set like this. And also we use the benchmark data set, ISCX and Phishing. There are also a well-controlled number of samples here. So first, we just wanted to compare our method with conventional prototypic network. As you see, the number in the top means the number of samples. If we just use number of 2 samples as prototypes, then the conventional prototypical network can produce only 50% accuracy. However, our method, perfect. And increasing the number 5, same situation, and 50, same. Our method is a little bit lower performance. However, 100 and finally the 5,000, still, compared with the conventional method, our method produces the better accuracy. That means that the proposed method offers the exceptional resilience and high accuracy for future learning in phishing URL detection. So especially in the situation of limited number of samples, maybe our method is much viable to solve the problem. And also we try to compare the performance with some competitive method with the 3 different data sets. CNN LSTM is just the conventional method to solve this kind of problem. And also we compare the taxation and also the original prototypical network and logic integrated triplet network. And all the cases, our method produces the best performance in terms of the accuracy and recall. It was quite promising anyway. And also we try to analyze the inside of the representation with TSNE. You know, the stochastic neighborhood encoding, embedding is quite popular to visualize this kind of data set. So as you see, the input space here, the phishing and benign is a little bit mixed up, a little bit difficult. However, after using the prototypic network, a little bit the same class data set gathered together a little bit. However, by using our disentangled prototypic network, it's quite beautiful, right? benign and phishing are just sorted in the same area. It was quite promising. So bottom line is that the proposed method provides a more structured and discernible feature space that is quite crucial for real-world applications. Okay, that's all. So we try to solve this problem with many well-known techniques. However, that the way of hybridization is our idea. So maybe we can summarize the contribution as follows. We try to devise the new loss function with triplet loss and prototyping loss to enhance the feature separation for better generalization. And especially this method is powerful when the number of samples are limited in few-shot learning scenario. So we demonstrated the robustness in real-world conditions with limited data in the experiment. Still, we are ongoing to work on to solve the zero-day phishing attack. It's quite a serious problem. So we try to investigate the applicability of our proposed method to other cybersecurity challenges like evolving malware. So malware detection is another topic that we want to deal with. And also, the time complexity is a little bit of a problem. I didn't mention anything about the time spent. However, the proposed method requires more overhead in terms of the computational computation. So we try to devise some method to reduce the time cost imposed by the triplet sampling, and potentially through alternative sampling technique or optimization method. That's all. Thank you for your attention. Any question or comment? Okay.
I very like the embedding method. It's really nice. It's presenting really good space in the TSNI area. My question is rather about this URL phishing problem. Is this because the phishing URLs are based on the domain and the rest of the address? And my question is whether using just the domain wouldn't be enough, just pre-processing of the text. If there are any studies about this, or is it important to use all the address?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I'm also not that good expert in this area. However, it is, firstly, I also thought like that. You know, just the URL can be easily discriminated with the domains or something, but it was wrong. Sometimes that the phishing URL, the scammer just devise quite similar one. Actually, you know, standard principle, the PD, actually the dot is just missing. That kind of a slight change to the original URLs can give us some difficulty to overcome. So anyway, we need some more sophisticated techniques like machine learning or deep learning, I guess. Thank you. Any other question? No, I think then that's enough. And is there the speaker for the third paper? No, he's no show. We have 20 minutes left before the end of this session, but as I mentioned before, after this session, we'll have the keynote speech in this room. So it is just good for vacant this room before the keynote speech. Okay, thank you for your attention. And after the keynote speech, still the session will be going on. Okay, thank you.